there are people on there
Yep.
who are very pro-vaccine, who are anti-mandate, and there are people on there who have not been vaccinated but aren't anti-vax because they're just not these vaccines, right? And I put myself in that camp. It's just, yeah, no, it's not about that. But we're
Yep.
they're going to try and characterize it as anti-vax because that's a dog whistle for certain people in this story, right? As soon as you call it, it's like calling somebody a conspiracy theorist. It's just that you just get to paint them with that brush, and we're
Well,
all
it's
done.
really,
Oh, you're one of
it's
those
a
people. You know?
scent that is applied to you to keep others away, right? They're not going to convince you or me, right? Or anybody who knows us well. I mean, am I an anti-vaxxer? I don't like these vaccines. I don't think they're wise. They're too narrowly focused. There are too many design failures built into them. They're too novel. We know too little. We know that the trials that were done to establish their safety were not high quality. They weren't large enough. They didn't go on long enough. There are problems here that a reasonable person can look at. Does that make me anti-vaccine? Well, let me tell you something. I have given I don't know how many lectures to my students about the glory of the mechanism by which vaccines work. I think it's one of the most beautiful stories I know. I'm extremely pro-vaccine in a general sense. I will tell you that watching pharma do this has made me concerned about adjuvants in a way that I wasn't before, right? I worry that there's something about the way we generate vaccines now that we in the public need to know more about because it's having effects on our immune system that are more general than this basic vaccine mechanism, which I find so beautiful. But there's no way. I mean, this Michael Gunner, this Australian guy, who every so often says the quiet part out loud, and we get to hear what the plan really is. You know who I'm talking about? I think he's from Northern Australia, and he every so often he says something colorful about, your personal vaccination status is irrelevant. If you are anti-mandates, you are anti-vax. That guy, right? Yeah. So anyway,
Well, that
that's
guy,
the
yeah, I know
plan,
that guy.
is that they're going to use that stigma against anybody who has any reservation about any vaccine or any measure that might be used to get people to take it. And the point is, anybody with any level of intelligence whatsoever knows that that is not a definition that one could reasonably apply. If anti-vaxxer is a thing, then surely somebody who is pro-vaccine and anti-mandate doesn't warrant it. Somebody who is pro-vaccine in principle but not pro every single vaccine doesn't warrant it, right? It's obviously a trick. It's a magic trick, and frankly, it's not a very good one, right? It's not compelling. You have to want them to fool you if you're buying that stuff, and if that's you, you have to look yourself in the mirror.
Yeah. And the whole mass formation idea is to get you focused down on stuff, right? It's like hypnosis. The idea is to get you so that you're just focusing on this dot at the tip of your nose and you can't even resolve it's a dot. I mean, it's that hyper focus. And so we've been hyper focused for a long time on COVID deaths, right? Then you scratch at that a little bit and you find out, well, was that a death with or of? And next thing you know, we're battling over am I an anti-vax or a vax? And again, it's too narrow. The point is that if we'd had a complete and authentic public health response, we would have said, hey, how are we doing in terms of all-cause mortality? A lot of reasons people check off this mortal coil. How are we doing? And the answer is we're sucking at it, right? 2000 was bad, but 2001 was even worse. So by that objective measure, we can say whatever it is in total, we're doing worse. And that's the conversation we should be having. So I worry every time it gets pulled back down to, is it about these vaccines? Because that's not. They are a component of what should be a very rich tapestry of things that we would have in our toolkit at the public health level, but it's always about that, and that's it. And we don't even have, Brett, at this point, I can't even point you to a single study that says let's compare unvaccinated people to vaccinated people, but these people got early treatment too. I don't know what that data looks like. I have strong suspicions. I can infer it from studies that don't, that sort of triangulate on it, but we don't have the actual data. How is that possible to not have that data 2 years in?
I mean, we've seen this general pattern, which is, I hate to say it, but you can predict what the public health response to something will be. If it's actually promising, they don't like it, right? And that should not be a pattern. That is not a pattern that suggests error. That is a pattern that suggests some other plan. And it's appalling. And I will just say, if you want to peek into the resistance movement, there was this very good piece. I would guess that you saw it. John Campbell put out a couple days ago on his channel about the actual number of people in Britain. He's British. The actual number of people who died of COVID, right? And it was shocking, right? But here's my point. John Campbell is absolutely welcome and on the radar of people like you and me. He's pro-vaccine. He has been very good at analyzing the data around early treatment and ivermectin, and he's been courageous about talking about it. That's what the resistance movement sounds like inside. It's people who don't have the same perspective on what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. But we are coming to agreement on what the tools of measurement are that actually work, right? In the resistance movement, everybody knows that all-cause mortality is an important thing that is rarely conveyed. We know that we want autopsies done because autopsies tell you something we can't find out otherwise, and we know that the level of autopsies has been artificially reduced, and that suggests that there is an obvious desire not to know what kind of harm is being done. So it is a big tent, right? You're going to see that big tent on the stage tomorrow at this march, because you have people who have arrived from, as we began this discussion, they've arrived from dozens of different paths to an agreement that something has captured our focus, as you're pointing out, and it has mesmerized us into behaving in a way that is actually harming us. And, waking up from that, it's not going to be fun for a lot of people, but let me tell you, the longer you wait, the less fun it's going to be.
Yeah, that's the main point here is, look, we got to put a stop to this now. And the way mass psychoses or formations are stopped is with brave people standing up saying, no, let's stop. Let's stop. And so speaking of which, where you mentioned that, every single time if there was something favorable, they didn't like it. That data that John Campbell was talking about, where they showed that there was 17,300 people in the whole COVID experience, all 2 years, had died of COVID specifically, who weren't otherwise, burdened with a comorbidity. That came out because of a Freedom of Information Act request. That data had to be pried out, and that should have been put out there and broadcast by that same organization if they were doing the right thing. Right. But instead, you have to pry it out. And every time somebody says, hey, Chris, what do you think of the CDC report? I'm like, I'm going to dig into it and it's just going to be crap, because I know that they're going to use redefinitions, statistical sleight of hand. They're going to ignore stuff, the bad study design. It's just been a horror show. I mean, this whole thing on natural immunity. Right. The CDC, as recently as just a week ago, when they finally admitted, oh, hey, natural immunity looks kind of cool, they were using this really ridiculously underpowered Kentucky sort of database sort of sleuthing thing where they only had 290 examples to look at. And then they held that out as like, oh, yeah, vaccines are better. When we had this extraordinary million-plus case count, case-matched cohort study out of Israel that said the opposite.
Yeah.
Right? So the CDC should have been there saying, oh, here's why we don't like that study, and here's why we love. They didn't. They just put this crappy study out, and everybody sent it to me like, "What do you think of this?" I'm like, just wore me down.
Nothing wakes them, and that tells you that what they are is somehow a PR outfit, right? It's all broadcasting things, and one thing that has been just shockingly obvious to those of us who have dug into it is the level at which what people are claiming as evidence pointing to the public health narrative and its prescription is based on accounting fraud, right? And, you could look at one instance of it and you could say, well, maybe that's an error, right? Maybe they got the categories wrong as an error. But the number of places where they have created a definition for a category and they have shunted people into it in order to amplify certain very predictable messages, right? What's the message? The message is that COVID is very dangerous and it's killing lots of people. What's the message? It's that the vaccines are reducing harm to people, right? What's the message? Is that those without the vaccine are clogging hospitals. It's like they will just take anything that points in that direction and they will reorganize definitions however they have to do it to make that appear to be the case. And any analysis that just simply doesn't start with a presupposition about what landscape we're in, sees that that's nonsense. And so you start to tune it out, right? What do you think of this latest CDC report? Well, why are you asking me that? Has the CDC gotten anything right here? I'm not aware of it, right? They've been wrong across the board. So at some point, you tune that out and you go looking for something that isn't consistently wrong, right? Something that is open to various possibilities. And you'll find that that's a very vibrant discussion. It just, to your earlier point, the interesting stuff is on the fringe. Why? Because it was driven there, right? The natural people who would be at the head of the conversation of figuring out what's going on in COVID and what we do about it, those people have been driven to the edge. They've either been silenced, they've been threatened, and they've chosen to self-censor, or if they haven't been willing to self-censor, they've been driven to the edge. And so you know what? That's where you'll find them.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was very early on, I really cottoned on to the whole FLCCC guys, and I was helping them set up early webinars, and then I've been on the board for a while, and it's gotten a lot better since, but I remember in the dark old days, maybe, I don't know, 6-8 months ago, their Facebook page would get taken down. They were getting YouTube strikes left and right and having, channels pulled down. And they were saying nothing other than they were highly qualified medical doctors discussing data. That was it. They weren't out there railing against, what they thought, Pfizer was full of crooks or anything like that. There was nothing that would rise to libel. They were very careful. And watching that level of friction and hostility that came at them was astonishing. I'd never seen anything like that before. Maybe you had in your battles, but that was astonishing to me.
It's astonishing in a way. I'd never seen it with doctors, and there was something just impossible to stomach about watching these obviously highly dedicated people who actually save lives for a living. They do it day in and day out, being treated as if they were up to something, right? I mean, it couldn't possibly be more the inverse of what was happening. You had doctors trying to be doctors, trying to sort out a live situation that we've all been told is of utmost importance, and being demonized for the effort because their conclusion didn't match the public health authority, which was obviously wrong. And then to watch the tech sector leap to attention and start treating them as if these were somehow, dangerous monsters. It was just such a preposterous show of force on the part of whatever the thing is that is arranging the narrative that, either you got it when you saw that or you didn't. And I'm glad those dark days are over, but new dark days are coming.
Yeah, I agree. So we got a little dawn coming. I mean, I do feel that the censorship is lightened up a bit. Now, for the march tomorrow, I'll tell you, there's this march, and then there's a bunch of people speaking. So they've invested in jumbotrons and a stage and sound and all that stuff. And unfortunately, I won't be there to speak. That would have been fun, history moment. But there's a bunch of the doctors, I think, are very familiar names. And then there's going to be vaccine injured people there talking, who finally get maybe a national platform voice. I can't even imagine how awful it must be to be like the mother of Maddie DeGarry, Stephanie DeGarry, and know that you were doing the right thing. And then as soon as things went a little wrong, like the system just basically said, we think your daughter's just nuts, and no support. It's just awful. But to hear from, there'll be union people there, firemen. This is where I think we get to see, Brett, just how broad this really is, because this isn't a bunch of anti-vaxxers. This is Americans who have some questions, who feel like they weren't allowed to ask those questions and that felt wrong, and they don't want to put up with that anymore. So that's what I'm excited to see is, that this is the beginning of something, I hope, which is us finding our voice again. And saying enough.
If I could pick up on a theme, there's something about watching the gaslighting of the injured, right? If this was an honest effort to control the pandemic and people had been injured because we had a vaccine that worked, it had a unfortunately high price, a certain number of people, rolled the dice and it came up bad for them, we would take care of those people, right? And the point is, you did this so that we could be safe and we could go back to life. And the point is, these would be heroes. We would not be gaslighting them. We would be accepting that they were harmed. They would be getting free care for the rest of their lives for the cost that they paid on the rest of our behalf. And to watch them gaslit tells you what kind of monsters we're dealing with. The other thing that does that, for me at least, is the withdrawal of treatments that work early, right? The idea that you're going to simultaneously tell us we have this very dangerous disease as you withdraw therapies in which there is no profit, but that work, that is a level of indifference to human suffering that is almost impossible to imagine. So those two facts, if I need to think about, well, what's really going on here, I can check in with them and I can say, well, at the very least, whether this is people making a decision in a conference room or it's an emergent process, it's a monster, right? It is willing to actually literally harm people with a vaccine and then gaslight them over whether or not they were harmed. It is willing to prevent people from having medications that might protect them, might save their lives. And no process that is capable of those two things can be defended. It's not an accident, and there is no decency to it.